Hello, I'm Beth Britton. I support Dementia Community with their communications work. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our April webinar. Before we get into the topic for today, I wanted to briefly explain a bit more about Dementia Community. Dementia Community is a charitable community benefit society, a membership cooperative that provides learning and networking opportunities for the dementia care community. Dementia Community's core purpose is to connect and empower the dementia care community. Dementia Community's vision is for a world where all people in the dementia care community feel connected, informed, empowered, and purposeful, and are actively engaged in co-producing changes that improve everyone's experience of dementia in care and in wider society. To sum up, if you're aware of the work of the National Dementia Action Alliance before it disbanded, we hope that Dementia Community is a replacement for the NDAA. Community members own a £1 share in Dementia Community and membership is open to everyone. So if you aren't already a member, do join us. There are both benefits and opportunities for all of our members. My colleague Beth Lang will put a link in the chat that will take you to our membership page. You can also scan the QR code that is on your screen. If you're having any difficulties relating to our website, links working or membership, then do feel free to message myself or Beth Lang. So on to today's webinar. Our topic today is Thrive, Benefits of Gardening and Green Spaces for People with Dementia and how to provide year-round accessibility. I will introduce you to our speaker shortly, but just some brief housekeeping first. We are recording this webinar, so if you don't want your face on the recording, please turn your camera off. Please use the chat for your questions, so we will have a Q&A after the presentation and we will be keeping an eye on the chat. We hope to have some live participation too, so if you'd like to ask your question yourself, do raise your hand when we get to the Q&A and we will come to you. Afterwards, my colleague Beth Lang will email you the slides. The recording will also go onto our YouTube channel, Journal of Dementia Care, so do look out for that and share that link when it's available. We will also send you a feedback form afterwards, and we'd be really grateful if you could fill that in for our learning and development as an organisation. So let's get started. Our speaker for today is Damien Newman, who is the Training, Education and Consultancy Manager for Thrive. Damien has very kindly stepped in for his colleague Mark Emery, who was advertised as today's speaker but has had an urgent commitment to attend to. Mark's left us in Damien's very capable hands. So Damien, welcome. Hello and over to you.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Beth. Pleasure to meet you all. Let me just start by sharing my screen. As Beth says, there's a short presentation and talk that I'll go through, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes or so, and then we'll see if there's some chat and discussion around the subject for us to have as well. Just bear with me. It always just pops the top bar just where you'd want to share. So here we go. Perfect. Okay, so so I'm going to talk a little bit on, the benefits of gardening and essentially how time in nature, green spaces can be valuable across the year for people with dementia. Okay, so I work for Thrive, and Thrive have been around for over 40 years championing the benefits of gardening. We are the Gardening for Health charity, and we do lots of different work in lots of different ways. And I'll talk through a little bit about what we do so you can be signposted to some things that might support you in your caring roles that you all have. Talk a little bit about our experience and the way we work with dementia, and then I'll broaden it out to just think more about the evidence base for gardening for health, or gardens for health, and nature-based activities for people with dementia, and from there give some hopefully very practical tips and ideas of how you can connect people to people with dementia to the outdoors in different ways. So Thrive have 3 gardens across the UK, one near Reading, where we have had a programme of supporting people with young onset dementia in the past. At the moment, that runs through young persons with dementia Berkshire, a different charity, but a program that started at our site in Reading. We look after a number of areas, in particular the Old English Garden and the Herb Garden in Battersea Park. And then we're currently renovating, if anybody's long in the tooth like I and can remember Pebble Mill and Jeff Hamilton on Gardener's World, then we're currently renovating those gardens in King's Heath in Birmingham. And each week, around about 200 people will come through our gardens and they will engage in a program of social and therapeutic horticulture. Social and therapeutic horticulture is an umbrella term, essentially, that's often used in the UK, different to horticulture therapy. Quite nuanced in its distinctions, and essentially perhaps the multimodal nature and the way in which essentially just being in nature is good for us, whether we need therapy or whether we need an intervention or not, means that in some ways collectively as a sector we can be a little bit difficult to pinpoint and describe effectively. But for us, we work with people who have a defined need in our gardens and essentially put together a person-centered program for each individual through getting to know them really well. That cold word for getting to know someone, using assessment to make sure that we're able to engage people and essentially engage people in a way that is in line with the outcomes that would be good to achieve for those people. It's all of our work is essentially informed and inspired by that experience. We have an information service which is free and accessed all around the world by people. And you can find this on the link that I've included there at Get Gardening, essentially. There we look specifically about how you can access gardening for health and wellness. Sometimes in some of the articles and some of the content look at very specific elements of gardening for health. So that can include thinking about how to garden when you're living with dementia or faced with the challenges that dementia can bring. Sometimes it's more generic, sort of how gardening, how to garden in a way that makes you feel good, how to maybe strategize gardening into your life like a gym or diet. And so this is a service where we're really broadening out beyond just people with defined need. It's great advice for anyone. And there are over 140 different articles on that website now. So we cover pretty much everything you could think of in relation to gardening activities. So through seed sowing and pricking out to harvesting, building raised beds, correct widths and for pathways and how to arrange slopes. All of the design information is there as well as lots of information about how to make the most of perhaps the passive as well as the active side of gardening as well. So how to enjoy just being out in the open, how to find nature as quickly as you can and things like this. And then there's my side of the organisation Thrives Work, training, education and consultancy. And so each year I'll see around about 1,000 students come through our programme. And that includes short courses as well as bespoke and consultancy work. So at the moment, for example, we're working with MHA, who are the largest care home provider in the UK. And with them, we have a pilot programme working in 5 different sites, trying to create best practice green care within their sites, which includes obviously what we do using gardening for health, social and therapeutic horticulture, but broadens out into overall use of nature as well. Previously, we've done work like the Living Through Landscapes programme. That's all 30 dementia gardens created around the UK. And if anybody would ever like to find a place to visit, to see firsthand what a therapy garden looks like, what social and therapeutic horticulture looks like, then you can always get in touch with us. On the previous slide, an email, training@thrive.org.uk is always a good one, connects you straight to the training team. And we're pretty good at connecting people up in a way that's, specific to you. So if there's a particular angle, if you're in a particular part of the world or part of the country, then we can probably connect you with somewhere worth a visit. Okay, so we've got all of this experience and all of this background in working with people with dementia, in how to essentially make the most of the natural opportunities that exist in gardens and gardening for health. And it's probably best to think about it in those 2 ways, as a way of thinking it through. there are lots of benefits of gardening that come from the activities. Okay, but there's also lots of benefits from gardens and nature that come from just simply being in nature. Okay, and obviously nature and gardens have an overlap, but they are a little bit distinct. So for one of the reasons that we, at Thrive, we're passionate about gardens is because of the variety of different activities that gardens provide. Okay, so, across the activities that gardening provides, you can pretty much exercise every single part of the body. You can engage every single area of cognition. We can engage our different senses, and our different senses become aware and alive in gardens and things like this. And of course, gardens often represent either a more managed or even a safer form of nature, which at certain stages of dementia care perhaps offer the most practical and the easiest routes to gain those benefits of just simply being outside. So, if we think about it in those two terms, gardening as an activity is good for you, time in gardens and time in nature similarly good for you. And the evidence is really very clear on this now. Just simply 5 minutes in nature is enough to impact upon mood. We have a rough understanding that essentially, if you get about 2 hours of time in nature each week, then the benefits to your mood start to plateau. So we can suggest that a good dose of nature is around 2 hours, but just 5 minutes is enough and can make a difference. And with people with dementia, essentially, good mood or improved mood sometimes can be one of the most critical things. And so it can be that simple as just simply going outside for 5 minutes and not necessarily doing anything, just sitting there, being passive. Okay. And so, when we think about the benefits of gardening, we can think about it through that sort of model with, active and passive values. Just simply being in garden, it is good for us physically, actually. We're getting lots of vitamin D, which is really important for health in a number of different ways. During the winter months, the sun is too low in the sky, and we don't actually absorb vitamin D, and so vitamin D supplements sometimes can be very valuable for people. But from around now onwards, from around the end of March, all the way through to the end of October, middle of November, getting outside gives us a daily dose of vitamin D. It also is demonstrated to be valuable in circadian rhythms. So in terms of helping people to regulate themselves in sleep and wake cycles, and also impacting on our metabolism, just simply going outside can be important for that. But obviously, as I've said, if we engage in gardening activity, we get a whole myriad of different opportunities to move the human body, which obviously can help us maintain stamina, strength. It can be reasonable for cardiovascular, heavier gardening activities like turning compost, wheelbarrow work, and things like this. This is about 2/3 of aerobic activity like jogging or swimming. Okay, so it's not quite as good aerobically as some of those traditional exercises, but it's still a good exercise. And again, the flexibility of it perhaps makes it more valuable. If we're working with people with, who are older with dementia and perhaps have elements of physical challenge in their presentations now as well, then obviously, gardening can be a good, gentle exercise that can keep us not just supple and, because there's things to reach out for and there's balance to be had, fine motor movement, gross motor movement, our entire physical presentation and all of our different physical skills are exercised. We have all sorts of psychological benefits from being outside in nature. I mentioned the mood boosting effect of just simply being in nature, but there is mood boosting effect in relation to gardening as well. It doesn't matter how long you've been gardening for. This time of year, we're all checking our seedlings, not in 14 days when we were told that they would germinate, but we're checking them every day, willing them into existence, willing these plants to grow and to nurturing them to maturity. And that gives us a huge amount of hope. Okay, and so, we can feel as if we're connected to our natural inclination to be carers. And again, something that's really valuable for people with dementia sometimes, who perhaps may lose the opportunity to care for others. quite as much as they once did. That ability to care for other living things is to present it to them with activities as simple as growing microgreens, looking after house plants, taking a cutting from rosemary or hebe or something like this. Obviously, we're working on our cognition, and so we could put some of the cognitive benefits alongside cognitive stimulation therapy in the way that different parts of our cognition are essentially getting a workout. There's sequencing, there's memory, there's organization, there's planning, there's language, there's numerical things going on, as well as the sensory. When we're in a garden, essentially we are engaged in a sensory world which is much more interesting and much more readable to our evolutionary brain. It occupies us better. There's gentle movement going on in the wind. There's temperature regulation to be understood. There's different color, there's different scent, there's even different taste. And so our psychological and also our cognitive elements are being exercised and engaged in when we go outside and garden. The social side is quite important to gardening as well. The UK is essentially a nation of gardeners. According to Mintel, around about 18 million of us garden on a monthly basis. So that might be one of the biggest shared identities in the UK. And after quickly catching up on the weather, even though we know what it is because we're all experiencing it, we can talk about gardens and the effect of the weather on the garden and things like this. These are conversations that form a fabric in everyday conversation and would have done for many of the people who are experiencing dementia for a long time. But obviously the opportunity to nurture other plants gives us other opportunities to be social, to be able to share with others. We always grow too many tomato seedlings or too many of this or too many of that, and being able to give away a few things can be a nice way of remaining connected. And of course, for lots of people still living at home, then those conversations across the garden fence can be some of the most important ones, keeping us connected to those who are close by. And perhaps those people are in a position to not only share their social time, but perhaps a little bit of sharing that care and looking out for one another. And so there's lots of opportunities, social opportunities. In care settings, it can be a rich tapestry of different conversations. Old gardening books, Gardener's World can come on the telly, things like this. We see something happen in the garden. Birds start coming in at different times of year. Perhaps we might notice the bees, at this time of year, we're starting to see that change from it being just the solitary bumblebee to all of a sudden starting to see honeybees as the wildlife springs into action at this time of year. And so it can be an ongoing conversation in care settings as well. Something started to bloom. Let's wander out and have a look. And obviously there's a learning element to this as well, which is always great for wellness, to feel as if you continue to learn or that you're helping others to learn. And people with dementia can be on either side of that. When you meet gardeners, you find them, amongst the most humble people you will ever meet because they know that they never know everything. There's always something new to learn in gardening. And there's lots of wisdom to be shared as well. And in lots of ways, what we call, gardening science, gardening process, a lot of it stems from essentially lore. LORE. It stems from passing down from generation one to another. And some of this information obviously can be there from people with dementia, an opportunity to share with others their passions, their strengths, their wisdom. And all of this as an activity, as a hobby in gardening, gives you that opportunity to access the environment. And when we're accessing the environment, essentially, we are exposing ourselves to a natural environment more aligned to our evolutionary history. And actually, this helps regulate our wellness in a way that is so entwined that the evidence base continues to produce amazing pieces of science. And I'll touch on these a little bit later. But all of those benefits in gardening, they cross over really well to the New Economics Foundation's 5 Ways to Wellbeing. 5 Ways to Wellbeing is a good few years old now. I mean, it's been around probably around about 10 or 12 years, but it was on the back of the biggest meta-analysis of wellbeing literature. And in a society where perhaps we need to focus a little bit more on what keeps us well, rather than thinking about the sort of more pathological way in which things can come along and cure us when we become unwell, then this 5 ways to well-being is a good framework. And it remains a good framework for everyone. And so, gardening gives you that opportunity to connect, that opportunity to be active, to learn, to give to others. I mentioned that garden in Battersea Park, the old English garden renovated. At this time of the year, there's 100 people a day going through that garden. It's a stunning garden. You have everybody there, families, people with pushchairs and prams, giving their children some fresh air in the city. People will meet up for coffee. It's London. People will sit on their Apple Macs pretending to write a novel, these sorts of things. And all of these people are welcome, and all of these people benefit from a beautiful environment that has been created for them by people faced with the challenge of ill health and disability. And so that opportunity to give and to be a nurturer still exists in gardening in an absolute abundance. And of course, it gives us that opportunity to be attentive, to take notice of the world around us. Okay, and so there's all sorts of ways in which, gardening is an activity, whether it's in the model that we do, social and therapeutic horticulture, or whether it's just about spending time with a loved one with dementia outside. There's a huge amount of value just very easily at hand. And essentially, you sort of end up with these three valuable therapeutic opportunities: the time to be in nature, the time to be in a social environment, and the time to be active and occupied. And this is the base model at which we work from at Thrive when we actually work in our gardens. Okay, so, all of our person-centered programs are based essentially on creating a program or a journey for an individual that balances these three things in the right way. Because some people will benefit more from the activity, others from simply being in nature, others perhaps more from the social side. I mean, certainly when you're working with people who are perhaps frustrated, experiencing stress and anxiety and things like this, then in lots of ways, short term, just simply getting outside is a really good thing to do, to just spend time in an environment that naturally calms. In dementia care settings, we could think about this as a strategy specifically as part of care planning, in the way that we perhaps help somebody get back to a better mood, a more sort of stable state, so that their quality of life is restored and improved. But for others, perhaps people at early stage dementia, maybe the activity is really important. Maybe that feeling I can still do things, that opportunity to essentially stimulate our cognition and our senses might be the more important of these valuable opportunities. And perhaps for some, combined with loneliness or perhaps being isolated, then that social side might be the bit that's really crucial. And so, people with dementia can benefit in lots of different ways. And through getting to know them, we can probably work out what's the sort of thing that would work best for them. And by getting to know them, of course, I'm talking about having really good conversations, trying to find out about that person's preferences in relation to nature, understanding their affinity. Because although through biophilia, which is a hypothesis first put forward by Wilson, we hypothetically have a direct genetic relationship with nature, that genetic relationship is shaped by culture, without doubt, through our lived experience. What I love in a garden will be different to what some of you love in a garden. And so being able to connect people in a way that's meaningful to them is obviously the most valuable and the most important. And getting to know people through those conversations, through understanding those people with dementia's life histories, can be absolutely critical to making this intervention work. It's a grand theory. It essentially suggests that humans have inbuilt into their nature a genetic response to environments that essentially tell us we're safe because they provide what we need. Okay, but perhaps also we develop an appreciation for life and the living world, perhaps through genetic factors, but also perhaps through culture and perhaps through our own experience of nurturing other living things, pets or plants in our background. And there are a couple of different psychoevolutionary theories underneath this that go to explain it. Ulrich, a famous researcher, put forward a seminal piece, View Through a Window, that demonstrated that people recovering from a gallbladder operation in a hospital recover quicker, asked for less analgesic medication, and even appeared to have less surgical complication when they looked over a garden versus a brick wall. But some of that isn't so usable as this construct. This is attention restoration theory, first put forward by the Kaplins. Rachel and Stephen, essentially saying that, nature is in tune with our evolutionary brain. And so when we go into a green space, it provides natural restoration to our cognitive fatigue. Essentially, it rests our mind just like sleep does. And so what's useful about this is it presents a framework that we can work from. Essentially, it says that what we want to do is create gardens that provide a sense of being away, that they feel like a different space, that there is enough extent in that space, essentially enough enough natural plant material, but perhaps also interesting hard features as well that occupy our mind. Thinking back to what I was saying a moment ago in terms of little bits of movement, changes of colour and things like this, the sensory side of things, but enough to occupy us. And that within that, there are perhaps individual elements that draw us into fascination. This is essentially a type of unplanned attention that is still restive, okay? And that in order for these environments, in order for gardens to be really valuable for their restorative qualities, they need to be accessible. And when we're thinking about people with dementia, there's a real evidence base behind garden design for that. And I can give some signposts to you to that at the end, essentially. But Stirling University have done great work. Gareth Chalfont has done some great work as well. So anybody who's got questions about that, just note down that, and I'll make sure I share those signposts well for you. Sometimes with dementia, though, comes a few barriers to engaging in either being in a garden or essentially gardening. And those barriers could be physical, sensory, cognitive, social, and emotional, right across holistic presentation, essentially. And so that process of getting to know people to be able to engage them well is important. Now, if this is, if the person with dementia is a loved one, is somebody that you're caring for within your family or friends, then you'll know them. But if you're carers, then you need to understand these things in relation to gardens a little bit, because you will understand them in relation to the built environment, the care setting. But how does that interpret into a garden? If you've got somebody who perhaps has, started to struggle with perception of depth, on different surfaces when we don't have enough definition between them, then we can think about modifying a garden to present with an improved perception of depth, or to reduce any shiny surfaces that often create that situation. So it might be about ensuring that hard landscaping is a little bit darker sometimes. Okay, so much as cleaning a patio can be valuable, particularly if it starts to get slippy, having it too clean can actually, on the other hand of it, create an environment, a hard landscaping that's a little bit shiny and things like this. Thinking about the placement of benches, thinking about the use of leaning posts. There's so much to it, and there is a lot to read on it. So if that's something that you're interested in, I won't be able to cover it all on this talk, but I can point you into good directions of how to think about overcoming the barriers to engaging in either gardening or in accessing gardens. Okay. And we do that through changing these different things, because essentially we can adapt the environment. Sometimes, for people with dementia, when you're trying to engage them, not having too much stimulation in that environment can be really valuable. If there's an activity you'd like to focus them on, if there's a richness in the plant world that you're working in, then perhaps having less distraction can be important. But obviously we can change our approach. We can think about gardening in a completely different way. And in lots of ways, when we're working using our model of social and therapeutic horticulture, we consider that approach to be a unique style of horticulture as distinct from any others. Okay, but our approach is also how we work as practitioners and things like this, isn't it? Or even as carers, thinking about clarity of instruction. For me, as you can tell, I can get through words pretty quick. And so if I'm working with people with dementia, I definitely need to write myself a script to remind myself to keep focused on the things that I want to communicate and not over elaborate in any way. Could be about the number of people that you're working in a garden with, or the way in which you give supervision and things like this. We can change tasks, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more depth in a moment. We don't have to be so focused on the traditional ways of gardening. We can do it differently. So we can think about tasks that are a bit more experiential and not so focused on getting the job done. We can identify tasks that have a richness of quality because of their social values, or tasks that have a richness of quality because they're particularly relaxing. Things like seed sowing, although cognitively a challenge sometimes, can also be activities which have brilliant flow and take you away from everything else as your mind just concentrates. So for different people at different stages of dementia, different activities might have different values. And then, of course, we can find adaptive resources and things like this. And again, on the Get Gardening website that I've signposted to you, you'll be able to find a wealth of ideas of different adaptive gardening tools. You can find ones with nice ergonomic handles for people struggling with strength or experiencing a bit of arthritis, but also, to help with seed sowing and things like that. You can find seed sowing templates, you can find seed tape mats, things like this. Sometimes it's about just doing things a little bit smaller. So using sort of margarine pot type, seed sowers or pots rather than trying to fill whole trays. Sowing tomatoes in little pots rather than in a tray that you're going to prick out. So you get rid of the trickier task, but you still get the joy of growing your tomatoes and things like this. So we can change the resources to suit people. One of the tools we really love to use at Thrive when we're working with people with dementia is the pool activity level scaling instrument. And this is an occupational therapy tool that can be found quite widely used in dementia services. And we use it not in its entirety, but in its philosophy, if you like. So we view dementia when we're working with people with dementia in this sort of construct. So we sort of think through that, at earlier stages of dementia, people are still planned, performing pretty well, often going for long periods of time without any noticeable sign of dementia. And at that stage, still getting the job done, like I say, can be massively important. But as people progress through dementia, perhaps they go into a more exploratory stage. Maybe certain skills are disappearing and other skills are being overused to try and compensate, perhaps trying to make sense of the world around them a little bit, beginning to rely on sensory clues as well as things that would be processed more cognitively. And then as we further progress, perhaps we end up in more sensory or reflex stages, where perhaps our ability to carry out complex cognitive tasks can be reduced. Our ability to be independent and have full agency may start to weaken as well. We may have changes to our presentation and our personality, as well as the way we're able to carry out skills of daily living. And then, of course, in a very progressed reflex stage of dementia, we may no longer be reaching out into the world, but essentially waiting for the world to come to us, responding to direct sensory stimulation rather than seeking it out. And we can apply this in the way that we think about gardening. Firstly, in a general way, thinking about what I've said a few times now, by going from a spectrum of end-focused activities to activities that are a little bit more experiential or just purely experiential. So at Planned, the full range of gardening is on offer for people. There's no reason why people can't garden just like they always have. It might just need one or two slight adjustments or slight adaptations. Adaptations that person is probably starting to put in place in their life in general in order to make sure they, do their shopping and remember that this has to be done on this day and things like this. And exploratory stage, certainly, plenty is still on offer. Maybe, a little bit more support and a change of approach can be very supportive. And getting the job done could be still important, but perhaps, we might see a little bit of frustration and agitation starting to creep in. And so the balance between focusing on, activity and occupation and just simply spending time in nature might change. And perhaps we start to introduce some of the more experiential activities that certainly become valuable in sensory and reflex stage. At sensory, deadheading, watering, sometimes things like potting up and planting out. These are relatively short sequential tasks, 3, 4, 5 steps. And so these can be tasks that people with progressed dementia can still carry out on the right day, on the right on the right hour, when you're managed to engage in the right way as well. Things just come together and jobs can still be done. but perhaps we don't start introducing the activity in that guise. We don't say, nice to see you all. Today we're going to plant up some Grecian bowls. We might change our introduction, the way we set up and present things. Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Look at all of the lovely plants we've got in front of us. So we start taking the person towards the more sensory engagement and the more experiential side of it, making sure that we note that the social side is experiential, and that's why I tend to use that experiential term rather than just sensory. Okay, because the experience can be more than just the sensory. It can be about connecting with the others, as well as the conversations that might bring. And then obviously, if we're working with people at reflex stage, then we're likely to be bringing sensory elements together, presenting them to a person, and maybe even working hand over hand. But essentially letting, across all of these levels, of course, always being led where possible by the person with dementia's preferences. In care settings, we quite like this as a framework to talk through how you can work with people with dementia. First and foremost, we challenge everybody in a dementia care setting to try to create a situation of nature empowerment, to enable people with dementia to access outside when and how they would like to. One of the saddest things I ever, dawned on me in my caring career, and I've been, around for about 30 years in caring roles now, was that sometimes people can go into dementia care settings and never see the stars very well again, maybe not go out at night again, as well as, those crisp mornings, or, or to experience rain on face, because essentially, of course, understandably, the tension between, care and risk in any of these settings is always a difficult tension to manage and a balance to get right. But if we can get to know people, understand their affinity for nature, then we can start understanding, how important it is for each individual and how that might be achieved. Some of it's about, essentially demystifying the risks of gardening. Sometimes it's about making it really straightforward. So one of the loveliest things we ever do in care settings, as far as I'm concerned, is we always, we try and put together things like communal coat racks next to the entrance into the garden. So anybody at any moment can grab a coat and go outside. They don't have to go back to their room. They don't have to wait for the carer to have 5 minutes to be able to do these things. Similarly, in the garden, have one of those lovely boxes that you get now, full of blankets and hats. And that way, if all of a sudden it gets too hot, you can pop on a hat. And if it gets too cold, you can have a blanket and stay outside a little bit longer. Just practical things that make it, remove the hassle for carers and make it something really achievable, really quickly making a difference. And then, of course, we can, think about nature enhanced activity. Essentially, if it can be done outside and the weather's good, it probably should be. This might be art activities, craft, performance stuff that you get in care settings. Could be the more lifestyle stuff, eating, socializing, meeting visitors. All of these things can go on outside, and the evidence is clear. Our mood will be improved, we'll self-report better well-being, our cognition is also improved and rested. And of course, then we've got that nature-based activity side. And again, this is where, really getting to know people gives us that opportunity to really connect them with an occupation that has been part of their life. And this could be, very much in line with that person's occupational preferences. For lots of people in the UK, it is gardening, but equally bird watching and all of the wonderful things around looking after wildlife and things like this. There's no reason why people with dementia can't be accessing all of the great places that exist, conservation, wildlife trust, trust for conservation volunteers, woodland trust. All of these places have great places, some of which are more accessible than others, but there's usually some way, even if you're not straying too far from a car, to actually get out and just be away from the sound of the road and the urban world into a more natural space. And for some people, that might be really valuable. Walking, even things like fishing and sailing and things like this. If they were part of that person's way of connecting to the great outdoors, then as people who care for those with dementia, we should be working hard to find a way to keep that going. Thank you. Any questions at all?
That was amazing, Damien. Thank you.
That's quite all right.
So I think we did have someone who was just about to speak, and I think I've interrupted them.
Oh, sorry. It was
Gail,
me.
hello.
Hello, hi. Yeah, really interesting, Damien. I would like to ask a question. I'm an occupational therapist, but my dad's in a care home. And at the moment, it's weird this has happened today, really, because I've got a bit of an issue with the care home, as in they have a garden. And I'm not an expert on this side, and I have learned a lot about dementia, obviously, with my dad. They have a garden, but my issue is it's okay, but it's not, there's two things. The access from the care home, that's more so broken conservatory door, nobody can get out. Another door that's got really rubbish ramps, a rubber mat. Even me getting my dad out in the garden, which I always do, is really, really disabling rather than enabling to actually get out in the first place. How do you, obviously I was quite interested, you said you're working with, I don't know who NHA are.
MHA, the Methodist Housing Association, they used to be, but they prefer MHA now.
Oh, sorry, MHA. Yeah, because I'm just interested in how to work with a care home. And basically, from my observations, it's because it takes quite a long time. I mean, okay, my dad's he's still mobile with a walking frame, but it takes time to get him outside, obviously. I know it's important to him. He was a gardener. I know that being outside is important for both of us. But yeah, not enough staff because things take time. Obviously, making some changes to the accessibility is key. And some things in the garden. But how if the care home, obviously, I mean, what I want to do is I want to go
You
back
want
to
to challenge them a little bit, don't
listen.
you?
Yeah, I
So
want
why
to
aren't you
challenge
going back?
them.
Why aren't you
Yeah,
going
and
outside? Yeah, perfect. So, essentially, it is difficult to challenge in some ways because, access to outdoor space and gardens and things like this aren't currently covered in either the NICE guidelines or the
I
CQC
know I've
framework.
looked. Yeah, I've looked.
And that's a real shame. And we actually work, with Natural England. There's a special SDH interest group that reports into both Department for Education, Department for Health, and DEFRA. And so, hopefully in time these things will change. But I think essentially, without doubt, they are failing in their requirement to be person-centered.
Yes.
If they're not allowing people outside, because without, it depends on the size of the care setting a little bit, but regardless of the size, probably at least of that generation, 25%, if not 50 and upwards percent of the people who are there would have been people who in their life histories have documented history of being outdoors people who love to
Yeah.
be outside. And
Yeah.
so if the care home isn't providing that access, then essentially I think they are failing in relation to the person-centered approach that they should be taking. I think that you can sort of, you can always direct them to our website or even, to our email. We can give free advice. You can sometimes find small grant funds around the country that support access to gardening in care homes and things like this, sometimes probably more local. And I know that's not your job.
No.
The care home should be doing that. But of course, you
I'm very
want to be able to
passionate about
present.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you want to be able to present in the right way, don't you? You're an occupational therapist, and I can see so many of you are carers here. And the last thing we need is somebody coming to us and saying, this isn't working, and I've got no idea how you make it work. If we can go to people and say, this isn't working, why don't we try these things? Then
Yes.
that's a
I want
much
to
more helpful
support.
conversation, isn't it? Yeah, you want to
I
support, you
would
want to
rather
help them.
support. It's
Yes,
important for my dad, and obviously it would benefit the staff. It would benefit the
yes.
residents as well, other residents. So I'm got to try to, but I'd like to be able to provide some a best practice or something about the health and well-being
Yeah, sure.
element.
So, okay, so here you go. I said I would give you some links in this way, and
Oh, sorry, you can do
there's
that afterwards,
no, no,
Damien.
no, it's okay. Let's do it on this conversation now because it's a perfect time. So, in terms of access to gardens, either Stirling University Dementia Garden Guide, which is a book. It's about 10 years old now, but evidence-based in the way it thinks about design for dementia gardens. And then for me, my favorite resources are by Gareth Chalfont, and that's Gareth Chalfont spelt with a U. And I'm going to find it now. And he has some free guides on developing gardens for people with, dementia care settings and things like that.
Gail, I would just say while Damien's looking for that, so my background is a former carer to my dad. He was in care homes for the last 9 years of his life. He adored to be outside. We had to champion that as a family because there was never enough carers. Our garden was not accessible.
No,
We actually fundraised as families to get
did
some money
you?
to try and do some stuff to
Mm,
actually make it a bit more accessible. So we had, fetes and coffee mornings and things like that. And I think they did eventually, the manager was very persistent and she did also get some funding from the provider.
mm.
Looking at the chat, you're not the only person who's feeling very frustrated with this as well.
It's just a wasted resource.
It
It's an
is.
absolutely
It is.
wasted resource. And but weirdly, and talking, Damien, listening, it's really, because I say about bringing nature indoors. And even where the conservatory is, which is actually the easiest and accessible way out, it's been broken for ages, the door. But actually, they're missing a trick. They're going to know about this. I haven't actually put anything. I've spoken to the care home manager who says, look, Gail, email in. You've asked me. I can't get any response from the owners. So this is good. Put it in writing, because I want to put it in writing with some, I've already started to create it. But basically, yeah, they're missing a trick because the conservatory is the way out, easiest way out to the garden. But even the conservatory can be used to bring nature indoors a bit for people. So they have it there, but they just, yeah, and I'm going to make sure they know the importance of the health and well-being
So
aspect.
this website up here, Gail, is brilliant for that, because not only does it have a great guide, it also has really good, good description of the evidence base and things like this, so
Oh,
that
that's
you can
great.
make that case
Thank you.
confidently. There's the Dementia Green Care Handbook that, again, you can download this for free. And that's a great resource in terms of developing gardens and the way to do it. Our Get Gardening has some good stuff on it as well. But to be honest, Gareth here is, I've worked with a few times. He's put together brilliant resources
Oh,
and
thank
also
you.
the content that would help you put those arguments together. I also really agree with Beth. I think that, whereas sometimes, volunteering and fundraising for particularly private care homes perhaps feels a little bit difficult at times. Actually, when it comes to doing so over the garden, that's where, in my experience, often, when we've done things like that with care homes, we've been told, oh, it won't work. We never do very well for volunteers. When we asked for volunteers to do this, we didn't get anybody. But when it was a day, day in the garden to tidy it up as family members, all of a sudden you had 15 people there.
Yeah, weirdly,
And so you might be lucky with that sort of coming together as a dementia community and as volunteers, and and finding some support in some progress in that way as well.
weirdly, I actually spoke to a couple of residents, relatives, who said, "Oh yeah, we've been thinking about that as well." So it's actually also the people of the families of the people that you love getting together
Yes.
to make a case. And I'm right at the start of it. I've spoken about it. I need to put something in writing. I want to sort of, and I know the care home manager's on, so that's a good start. So we've got some, I just wanted to sort of put it along with some research or something to back up what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Because I
so
haven't got all the ideas.
through Gareth, the
It's really
other great
helpful.
organisation is Dementia Adventure.
Yes, I've heard of
I
that.
would have thought some people have come across there, and so they did a couple of pieces with Natural England. One is Greening Dementia, which was a literature review of dementia, nature-based intervention dementia literature from about 2014, maybe 2016. So it's getting a little bit older now.
Yeah.
Then you also have their second piece, which is It Nice Outside, which was a consultation piece through Natural England with people with dementia and their carers, which again could, if you wanted to build that
Yeah.
case alongside, some of the other family members, then some of that, we're the families. This is what, the dementia community says about it, because they really did go out well there. Then the other, from an occupational therapy perspective, Tanya Wiseman, who runs the OT education at Swansea University now. She was at Bristol. She writes great in the world of OT in relation to gardening in later life.
And then there's
really
lots
well.
of links there with OT. I have done my own
Yes.
research, but it's really good. This has come at a timely, it's always good to speak to people who are actually a bit more knowledgeable. So I really appreciate all those resources. Thank you, Damien. I will look at those.
And Gail, Damien mentioned Dementia Adventure, our next webinar on the 7th of May, which I will introduce at the end. We have Dementia Adventure coming along. They are working
Brilliant.
with a lady called Debbie Carroll, and they're producing a webinar for us. And one of the things they are going to look at is risk assessments and barriers as to why people don't go outside and how people misinterpret risk.
Yes, and I agree. Sorry, and this is my last point on this, and thank you, Beth. Is actually, yes, they're risk averse, and obviously my career is positive risk way up against. I mean, I wouldn't mind someone taking my dad out because I know that's really important to him, but actually, there's that clash with.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and that's why, sometimes looking at that stuff by Gareth Chalfont and Sterling can be really useful, because then you can create gardens that not just are safer for people in care homes, but actually signal safety. It's one of the things I always say, when we're doing sort of consultancy on developing gardens for dementia is you preferably want the person with dementia to get to that door and think, I can get there. I can move over to there. And and just have some really close signals of accessibility, which can be a bench. We often in care homes we try and design in a way where there's never any more than 5 meters between stopping points. And a stopping point for us can be a bench, it can be a pergola or a leaning post or something else, just somewhere where you could grab hold, get comfy again, and then make your way to the next bit, or just
and it's all about, in my book, it's what people can do, but rather than what they can't do. It's promoting that, because there's so much that, exactly. Thank you so much, both of you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Gail. And I would just add to Damien's point about being person-centered and providers being person-centered. I think it's also worth bearing in mind there is a strong well-being argument here.
There is definitely.
And also, as a family member, obviously you will have regular reviews of your loved one's care. I would challenge them, where in the care plan are they supporting his desire to be outside and to have access to nature?
I think I'm the only one doing
care
that.
plans are part of the regulatory process.
Yes, good point. Thank you, Beth.
There's some good stuff there, and the mental health aspect as well. There is lots of evidence. Mental Health Foundation and others have done a lot around mental health as well, because we know that mental health, anxiety, depression also very strongly linked to people living with dementia, and obviously we're looking to alleviate that. Right, there's absolutely loads in the chat, Damien. I'm not sure we're even going to get through all of this. I'm going to go right back to the beginning. So Chris said his dad has PSP, so that's one of the rarer forms of dementia. And I know his mood has been improved recently as he has been able to start going out into his garden and do something he can still do and enjoy, which I think just sums it up. It's so empowering. Caroline's saying, sadly, in the home where I think that's where I work, I've been told we can't have communal coats, blankets due to infection control. And I've said, our next webinar on risk assessments, come along.
It's such a shame, isn't it, when where it's such a simple answer that people can give that I don't think is particularly acceptable, I have to say, because okay, so you're sharing armchairs and settees and I know there's curtains in care homes that clearly haven't been laundered for 2 months and things like this. I can understand shoes, but coats, if they're washed weekly, if if there's a check on them in relation to that they've nobody's spilt food accidentally, or any of those things that might happen to anyone's, same reason we wash a coat and I spilt tomato sauce and spaghetti down me just 2 days ago, so it's best if I wash that, isn't it? And so these are simple solutions that people should be doing, and it shouldn't be too easy an excuse, I don't think. But at the same time, they're under pressure. We've got to be diplomatic, and so pick and choose what you focus on, I guess.
Absolutely. So Judy says, I'm so frustrated because care homes where I live and work highlight their gardens in their brochures and promotion, but do not direct or their budgets to garden maintenance, let alone therapeutic garden programming. And we see this so much, don't we? And it's just so frustrating. Caroline saying, in my experience, managers don't like unhappy relatives who keep nagging. So that's one for relatives to just tub thump a little bit. Claire, reaching out to care home trustees if they exist, can be profitable, as they may well be into gardening too. Absolutely, if it's a charitable provider. Jessica, we are two occupational therapists who have set up the Sage Networking, a community interest company, has developed a community garden for people living with dementia. We realised if we wanted it to change, we would need to start it ourselves. Fabulous, Jessica, and all power to you. That just sounds amazing. Jane, Dementia Adventure have a great course around risk, well worth considering. Gabby's saying thank you. She's going to incorporate what you've said into their gardening and sessions at St John's Ambulance. So thank you, Damien. And somebody who's got a number on here, I think it's Christina. I'm a designer in a garden and landscape practice, and we're fortunate to be working with some forward-thinking care homeowners on this. However, I'd be keen to hear what people have found are other frustrations and big challenges when trying to get accessibility to gardens into care settings. If you don't have time to reply now, please do email Christina, because she's interested in hearing from you. Helen, here, how would you suggest using some of your ideas in a park setting or adapting parks to be accessible for dementia?
So I think that, parks essentially are public gardens, but perhaps they're not always public gardens where we can do the gardening. So I think that parks can be very much incorporated into, weekly routines and things like this. We have a resource on our website called Cultivating Wellbeing in Using Gardening, which is essentially a course that's aimed at anybody. And, part one is get to know your own affinity for nature. Part two is, understand the benefits. And part three is to develop a strategy to incorporate nature into your life for well-being. And I think you can think about that. So, since we put that course together, when I go and visit my mum, it used to be like a 25-minute walk for me. I actually take a little bit longer. I take 35 minutes now, but it means I walk through a park for 10. And so, making small changes so that people with dementia use the green space that we do have in our towns and cities. Not everywhere, but lots of us are lucky enough to live in cities that do have good green space. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a park. Sometimes it's just about knowing that's a lovely tree-lined road. There's a lovely, we walk past it, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. There's this lovely garden about, 400 meters down that road over there. And it's just stunning. They put in they got rid of the privet hedge and they put perennials in. Sometimes, there's some great gardens that you can view just walking through the, up and down locally around the road. And so you can get your steps in and also just, make a little bit of a route that takes in a garden, takes in a park, takes in some, trees this time of year, again, just down my road, trees in blossom. So even if you don't have a garden, you can still connect to nature relatively easy, I think. Sometimes there are friends of the park and, little community groups associated with parks, particularly bigger ones, and you can find out about those. I mentioned I'm happy to sort of signpost people to places we know of. The other one is Gardening for Health directory, which is really easy to find. It's basically gardening number 4. And that is something that also has, that's a website that has a really good list of I'm saying that and then I'm not finding it. But Gardening for Health, use the number 4. If you search that, you'll find it. Here you go. I'm just bringing it up now. Just quickly share so you can see the website on your screen, and then it's captured on the recording as well, isn't it? Which is nice. And so you can see here on this web, there's a directory of sort of community gardens and social and therapeutic horticulture places around the UK, and you can see that there are lots of them. There's still a couple of blind spots locally, and one of our strategies is to ensure that no matter where you live, social and therapeutic horticulture is available to you in the UK. But this is another website where you can find those other community-based things that you might get involved in. Obviously also lots of these community-based places in parks and other places are also starting to be connected to the link workers working in the social prescribing teams now in the NHS. And that might be another way of finding, ways to access community resources. But parks, it's about recognizing the change of seasons and the beauty that they have in them across the year. There's usually, squirrels and bird life and what have you around. and it's just a great place to take notice. You know, we're coming into summer. What would be nicer than getting into the routine of going out for a picnic lunch in a park?
Absolutely, absolutely, totally agree with you. We're running out of time, Damien. Jane said she's taken some of your courses and she really recommends them. She loved them. I think Mark really enjoyed your webinar as well. Damien's talked about not overloading residents with too much stimulation in a garden setting. Where could we find more information? What is optimal? Really quick answer, Damien, because I've got a couple more questions as well.
I don't know that you can find any guidance to say what is optimal, but what I think you can do is make that judgment based on each individual person with dementia. I think that'll always be the way. It's such a an individually experienced thing, isn't it? That everybody is different. Like I say, just 5 minutes is enough. And so, you've got that really easy to reach goal of let's spend 5 minutes every day outside, or let's spend 5 minutes twice a day outside. And that can be
I loved
achieved
your
all year
advice
round.
about, what can be taken outside and the weather's good, take it outside. It doesn't have to be a gardening activity.
No, of course
It's
not.
something
Yeah.
that goes
Yeah.
outside.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's go and read the paper. Let's have a chat. Let's have visits, all of these things.
So Helen, she helps with a friends group. They've got a volunteer garden group. She loved your walking idea. Judy, really interesting question, I think, to finish with. We are establishing a grief gardening program. Do you have set activities you use with people with dementia who are thinking and dealing with their own journey towards death? Obviously, dementia, progressive and terminal. So just any advice around that?
Yeah, sure. So, for me, you have again a really great organization who I'm going to put up on the screen, who might be worth getting in touch with, which is SDH for Palliative Care. And obviously, if you're working in palliative care, as this group of predominantly occupational therapists are, but many of them are people who have done our accredited courses. We have higher education awards and diplomas and what have you that anybody can access. If anybody ever wants information about our courses, you can find a couple of free ones you could do. But this organization is brilliant in relation to thinking about the specifics of gardening and and nature-based approaches for people with life-limiting conditions. And of course, naturally, that also includes people with dementia, so that consideration will be there. But I think there's, I mentioned earlier, at this time of year, to plant a seed is an act of hope and anticipation for a tomorrow. Okay, and there's something very powerful about that when we are, experiencing these most extreme points in our life. Faced with our life ending, or faced with the loss of loved ones, then actually that continuation of hope and that understanding of how life continues is a really important one. And of course, people can leave legacies through their interaction with the plant world. And I think that can be really important, as well as use it as either a backdrop or as in some way a way of structuring and managing conversations about these difficult themes. Because essentially the reality is that plants are living just like us, and they go through the same life cycles. And not only is the more calming, relaxed environment better for some of those conversations, but it can give us a language and a way of having those conversations as well. At this time of year, I'll leave you with this. At this time of year, one of the loveliest activities they do in our gardens is bee and butterfly bingo. Okay, so they just put down, we know what comes into our garden, but you could choose the most common. You pop it down on a bit of paper and everybody walks around the garden, and it just encourages everyone to take notice, to slow down and look, because of course for bees and butterflies, you've got to be a little bit careful as you walk through the garden so they don't hear you coming. You don't want to disturb them. But you need to look carefully as well, don't you? And you're seeking out those early blooms and those things of beauty that you can, in a moment you'll forget that you were looking for bees and butterflies, because the camellia is looking so stunning right now. And so again, then a conversation opens up, and 10 minutes later you think, oh, let's get back to the bingo. And so this time of year, it's a really lovely activity. And I think those sorts of activities that just bring us up close and personal in our relationship with the natural world are really great ones for people with dementia and those who are experiencing grief or living with life-limiting illness.
Amazing, Damien. Thank you. I think we could carry on talking. You know, this is a huge passion of mine. I think we've got many people with us who are equally very passionate. Maybe I need to invite you back in the future so we can revisit this again. But just to say a huge thank you to you. And we've run out of time, but there's some lovely comments in the chat thanking you for everything you've shared. I have absolutely loved it. Really inspiring, fantastic. And I would just say, Christina, if you want to continue canvassing opinions, do share onto our social channels. You'll find them via our website. I'm sure our community members would be more than happy to continue to contribute and share. That's what Dementia Community is all about. So just again, Damien, thank you so much. There's loads of thanks in the chat.
Can I just add one more signpost?
Yeah.
For Christina, but perhaps for others, is it the Four Nations Dementia Working Group?
Yeah, the Three Nations Dementia Working Group.
Yeah, I think Three Nations, sorry. I haven't spoken to Keith for some time, but Keith is somebody who is a dementia champion, as many of those people in that organisation are. And again, in order to get people with dementia sharing what they view as barriers, then I think they're a great organisation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also work with Innovations in Dementia, who do lots of stuff around their deep groups and everything as well, which is fantastic. Amazing. Thank you so much, Damien. And just to signpost everyone to our next session. So I have already alluded to it. Tuesday, the 7th of May, 2 till 3, take a breath in the great outdoors. And that is with Dementia Adventure and Debbie Carroll from Step Change Design. And I know they are going to talk around risk assessment. So that will be a very useful one, I think, for many of you who've commented today. Tickets are live, they are free, and the link is in the chat. Thank you very much, Beth Lang. So lots of lovely thanks for today, and a reminder to do our valuation as well. And thank you, Damien. Thank you to our audience. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future on a Dementia Community webinar. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.